I froze behind the counter of my coastal bookstore when the air pressure in the room suddenly dropped. Heavy enough to pop my ears, the brass bells above the door hadn't chimed. The storm outside was battering the glass. A relentless Tuesday downpour that usually made the shop feel safe, a cocoon of old paper, vanilla, and brewing coffee. But safety had just left the building. The air shifted. It didn't smell like rain anymore. It smelled of ozone, cold steel, and the terrifying, magnetic scent of a storm that had nothing to do with the weather. I looked up, and my heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack them. Kalen Thorne, the Alpha Prime, the man I had spent 5 years running from. He was standing just inside the threshold, water dripping from the hem of his bespoke charcoal suit. He wasn't wearing the tactical armor I remembered from the Pack Wars. But he didn't need it. He was the weapon. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, buzzing in time with the raw, leashed power radiating off him. He looked exhausted. There were new lines etched around his mouth, and a jagged, silver scar cut through his left eyebrow, a souvenir I didn't recognize. But his eyes were the same, molten gold, burning with a mix of exhaustion and a rage so cold it could freeze the ocean. 5 years of carefully constructed lies, of cash-only jobs and burner phones, crumbled in a single heartbeat. He didn't shout. He didn't roar. He simply reached back, without breaking eye contact, and turned the lock on the front door. Click. The sound was louder than thunder. 5 years. Elara, he said. His voice was a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards, straight into the soles of my feet. You hid well. I opened my mouth to speak, to lie, to scream. I didn't know which, but my voice died in my throat. My instincts were screaming at me to run, but my body was traitorously rooted to the spot. Paralyzed by the pull of a mate bond I had tried to starve into silence. Kalen, I whispered, the name tasting like ash. Please, you can't be here. He took a step forward. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't tear this city apart looking for answers. And then, the worst possible thing happened. The door to the back office creaked open. The small voice cut through the tension like a knife. I stopped breathing. Leo walked out, clutching his sketchbook to his chest. He was wearing his dinosaur pajamas, his hair messy from a nap. He looked at me, sensing the fear in the room. And then he looked at the giant, soaking wet stranger standing in the center of the shop. Kalen froze. The predator went still, his golden gaze locked onto the boy. He took in the dark, messy hair, the stubborn set of the jaw that mirrored his own. And then, Leo blinked, under the harsh shop lights. My son's eyes didn't look brown. They flashed a vivid, impossible violet, the mark of the Thorne bloodline, the trait that hadn't been seen in the pack for 3 generations. The silence that followed was suffocating. I saw the realization hit Kalen like a physical blow. The air left his lungs, his hands, hanging by his sides, clenched into fists so tight his knuckles turned white. He looked from the boy, to me, and back to the boy, his entire world reordering itself in seconds. He took a step toward us. I instinctively moved in front of Leo, shielding him with my body. Kalen stopped. His eyes burned into mine. No longer just angry. They were wrecked, haunted, and terrifyingly possessive. He lowered his head, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper that promised violence to anyone who tried to stand between him and what he had found. Tell me he isn't mine, Kalen said, the words jagged and raw. Look me in the eye and tell me he isn't mine, Elara, because if you lie to me one more time, I will burn this town to the ground. Burn this town to the ground. The threat hung in the humid air of the bookstore, vibrating against the glass. But as I looked into Kalen's shattered, furious gold eyes, I didn't see the man standing in front of me. I was pulled backward, violently, through time. The scent of rain and old paper vanished, replaced by the sterile, recycled air of a skyscraper and the sharp tang of fear. 5 years ago, it feels like a different lifetime. Back then, I wasn't Alara, the bookstore owner who knew how to load a shotgun. I was just Alara the archivist. Invisible, quiet, a nobody in the grand, terrifying machinery of Thorn Industries. The pack headquarters wasn't a castle. It was a 50-story fortress of glass and steel piercing the Seattle skyline. I worked in the sub-basement, surrounded by dust motes and centuries of pack history filed away in cardboard boxes. It was the only place in the building where the crushing weight of pack politics didn't reach. That was why he came down there. The first time Kalen Thorne walked into my archives, I thought I was going to be fired. He was the Alpha Prime, the CEO, the king of the city. He wore three-piece suits like armor and looked at people as if he was calculating their liquidation value. But down there, in the dim light of the stacks, he wasn't the king. He was just tired. He didn't speak to me that first night. He just sat at one of the reading tables, loosened his tie, and closed his eyes. I kept working, the rhythmic sound of my scanner the only noise in the room. He came back the next night, and the next, we fell in love in the silence. It wasn't a whirlwind, it was a slow, terrifying gravity. I was the mouse who fell in love with the lion because he let me see the thorn in his paw. He told me he hated the noise of the upper floors. He told me I was the only thing in his life that didn't want something from him. Then came the winter gala. I shouldn't have been there. I was staff, meant to be invisible against the walls. But Kalen had looked at me across the crowded ballroom, and the world had simply stopped. That was the night the bond snapped into place. It wasn't a poetic tug at the heartstrings. It was a biological imperative. A roar in my blood that brought me to my knees. The fated mate bond. Rare. Overwhelming. Irrevocable. He found me on the balcony. Trembling. He didn't care about the cameras or the council members watching. He pulled me against him, burying his face in my neck, inhaling me like I was oxygen, and he had been suffocating his whole life. Mine. He had growled against my skin. You are mine. Elara, for 2 months, I lived in a secret paradise. I was the hidden treasure of the Alpha King. We stole moments in service elevators, in his office after hours, in the back of his town car. He promised me he would announce us to the council. He promised he would make them accept me, even though I was just a low-ranking Omega with no family name and no money. I believed him. God. I believed him. Then the stick turned pink. I found out I was pregnant on a Tuesday morning. The joy was so sharp it felt like panic. An heir. I was carrying the Alpha's heir. I knew, logically, that this complicated things, the council would be furious. The political fallout would be immense. But Kalen loved me. We were mates. I needed to tell him. I needed to see his eyes light up. I wanted him to hold me and tell me that we were stronger than the politics. I took the elevator up to the top floor that evening. The executive suite was empty. The assistants gone for the night. The door to Kalen's office was ajar. I was reaching for the handle, a smile already on my lips, when I heard the voice, Silas, Kalen's beta, his advisor, the man who smiled with too many teeth. The leak is destroying us. Kalen, Silas was saying, his voice low and urgent. The Southern Pack knows our patrol routes. They know the financial weakness in the merger. Someone is talking. I froze. A leak. It's an Omega. Silas continued, his tone dripping with disdain. We've traced the information. It's coming from inside the building. Someone, low level. Someone invisible. She knows the layout. My stomach turned to ice. Invisible. Low level. Omega. The description fit me perfectly. And I knew how the council thought they believed Omegas were weak. Easily bought. Easily manipulated. If they knew about me, if they knew I was close to the Alpha, I waited for Kalen to defend the Omegas. I waited for him to tell Silas to look harder, to find the real traitor. But Kalen didn't argue. I heard the clink of glass, the sound of ice settling in a tumbler. When he spoke, his voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the man who held me in the archives. It was the CEO, the ruthless Alpha Prime. She's a liability, Kaylin said. The words were cold, detached, clinical. We cannot afford a weakness right now. Not with the merger pending. What do you want me to do? Silas asked. I held my breath, my hand hovering over my stomach, shielding the tiny spark of life growing there. Say no, I begged silently. Say you'll investigate, eliminate the threat. Kaylin said, I don't care who she is. If she's compromised the pack, get rid of her. Tonight, eliminate the threat. The world tilted on its axis. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. He wasn't talking about a spy. In my terrified, pregnant mind, I was sure he was talking about us. About me. I was the liability. I was the secret Omega he hadn't claimed publicly. Maybe he had found out about the baby. Maybe he realized an heir with a nobody like me would ruin his empire. He had chosen the pack over me. He had ordered his beta to eliminate me. I didn't stay to hear the rest. I didn't burst in and demand an explanation. I did the only thing a mother does when she senses a predator near her child. I ran. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering so loud I was sure they could hear it. I made it to the elevator, my legs shaking so badly I almost collapsed. I didn't go home to pack a bag. I knew Silas would be there within the hour. I went straight to the bus station with nothing but the clothes on my back, $200 in cash, and a burner phone I bought at a bodega. I threw my old life into a trash can 3 blocks away. I became a ghost. I spent the next 48 hours on a Greyhound bus, crying until I was hollow, clutching my stomach, promising the tiny, violet-eyed boy growing inside me that his father would never, ever get the chance to eliminate us. I thought I had escaped the monster, but standing here now, 5 years later, looking at the devastation in Kaylin's eyes as he stares at our son, I realized the cruelest joke of all. I ran from the man I loved to save our child, and I never stopped to ask if I was the one who got it wrong. The silence that followed Kaylin's threat wasn't empty, it was heavy, suffocating, like the air in a room moments before a gas explosion. Tell me he isn't mine, Kaylin had whispered, but I couldn't. I couldn't force the lie past my lips. Not with Leo standing there, staring up at this soaking wet, terrifying giant with eyes that mirrored his own. The violet flash in my son's irises was a biological paternity test that no amount of denial could erase. I moved instinctively, placing a hand on Leo's shoulder. I could feel the small tremors in his frame, not fear. Exactly. But a high-voltage curiosity. He was an Alpha's son. Even if he didn't know it yet. He didn't cower. Leo, I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to steady it. Go to the back room. Put your headphones on. Now. But Mom, now. Leo, Kaylin didn't stop him. He didn't even blink. He just watched his boy turn and walk toward the office. His gaze traced every step Leo took, drinking in the sight of him like a man dying of thirst. I saw Kaylin's hand twitch at his side. A aborted motion, as if his body was physically aching to reach out and stop him, to touch him, to verify that he was real and not just another hallucination born of a fevered wolf's dream. The moment the office door clicked shut, the spell broke. Kaylin's attention snapped back to me, and the devastation in his eyes hardened instantly into a diamond-sharp rage. He stepped closer, invading my space. His scent rain, ozone, and fury flooding my senses. It made my wolf whine in submission, but the human part of me, the mother part, locked her knees and refused to yield. You stole him, Kaylin rasped. It wasn't a question. It was an indictment. 5 years. You stole 5 years of his life. You stole him from his pack, from his father. I kept him alive, I yelled back, the fear finally boiling over into anger. I kept him safe from you. Safe from me, Kaelin laughed. But the sound was jagged. Broken. I am his father. Alara. I am the Alpha Prime. There is no safer place on this earth than at my side. Do you have any idea what you've done? You raised a royal heir in a bookstore, above a coffee shop, defenseless if the rogues had found him, if I had stayed. He wouldn't even have been born. I screamed the words at him, pushing against his chest with both hands. It was like shoving a granite wall. He didn't budge. But he looked down at me. Confusion warring with the anger. What are you talking about? He demanded. I heard you. Kaelin, I was there. The tears I had been holding back for half a decade finally spilled over. Hot and fast. That night, in your office, I was coming to tell you about the baby. I was so happy. I thought, God, I was so stupid. I thought you would be happy too. Kaelin's brow furrowed. I would have been. Alara. I don't understand. Silas was there. I choked out, the memory clawing at my throat. He told you about the leak. The Omega leak. He told you she knew the layout. Kaelin went perfectly still. His eyes narrowed, searching my face. And you. I took a shuddering breath. You stood there, pouring yourself a drink. And you said she was a liability. You said, eliminate the threat. I don't care who she is. You ordered a hit on me. Kaelin, you ordered your beta to kill the mother of your child because you thought I was inconvenient. I waited for the denial. I waited for him to tell me I was crazy, that I was hearing things, but he didn't. Instead, the color drained from his face so fast it was terrifying. The golden fire in his eyes extinguished, leaving them hollow and dark. He staggered back a step. Actually staggered, as if I had physically gutted him with a knife. He reached out blindly, gripping the edge of the counter to steady himself, his knuckles turning white. The Omega leak, he whispered. The words came out strangled. Yes. I hissed. Me, the invisible girl in the archives. Kaelin looked at me, and for the first time since he walked through the door, he didn't look like the Alpha King. He looked like a man watching his entire life burn down around him. Alara, he said, his voice cracking. That conversation. That wasn't about you. I froze. Don't lie to me. I heard you. It was a corporate spy, he said, the words rushing out now. Desperate. A woman from the marketing department. Silas found out she was selling our server schematics to the Southern Pack. She was the leak. She was the liability. The world seemed to stop spinning. The hum of the refrigerator in the corner suddenly sounded deafening. What I whispered, I didn't know you were there. Kaelin said, stepping closer again, his hands shaking as he reached for me, but stopped short of touching. I didn't know you were pregnant. I was waiting for you. I had a ring in my desk drawer. Alara. A ring. I was going to propose that weekend, but you said eliminate the threat. I was talking about a traitor, he roared, the sound cracking with agony. Not my mate, never my mate. I stared at him, my mind scrambling to rewrite 5 years of history. The spy, the marketing department, the ring, but you didn't come for me, I said weakly, clinging to the last shred of my justification. I left, and you didn't come. Kaelin let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He closed the distance between us, grabbing my shoulders. His grip was hard, desperate, grounding. You think I didn't come for you? He leaned down, his forehead resting against mine, his breath hitching in his chest. Alara. I tore the eastern seaboard apart, he whispered, the intensity of his voice vibrating through my bones. I hired every tracker, every witch, every mercenary from here to the Atlantic. I burned through half the pack's treasury in the first 6 months alone. He pulled back just enough to look me in the eye. I haven't slept a full night in 5 years, he said, Because my wolf howls for you until my throat bleeds. I have spent every waking moment checking faces in crowds, chasing ghosts, terrifying my own counsel because I was a feral animal without you. They told me you must be dead. They told me to move on, and I nearly killed them for suggesting it. A tear slipped from his eye, tracking through the rain on his cheek. You didn't escape a killer. Elara, he said, his voice breaking completely. You tortured a man who would have ripped the stars down for you. The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. My knees gave out. Kalen caught me. He hauled me up against his chest, wrapping his arms around me like iron bands, burying his face in my hair. He smelled like rain and grief and home. I didn't save my son. The realization washed over me, cold and nauseating. I hadn't been the hero of this story. I hadn't been the protective mother fleeing a monster. I had been the villain. I had taken a father from his son. I had taken 5 years of birthdays, of first steps, of scraped knees and bedtime stories. I had forced Kalen to live in a hell of my own making, believing his mate had abandoned him. While I played martyr in a bookstore on the edge of the world, I listened to the frantic beat of his heart against my ear, a rhythm that matched the one I had tried to ignore for 5 years. I didn't know. I sobbed into his soaking wet suit jacket. Kalen. I didn't know. I know, he murmured, holding me tighter, as if he was afraid I would dissolve into mist if he let go. I know. But you're here now. You're here, but we weren't safe, because just as the crushing weight of my guilt settled in, the red and blue lights flashing outside the shop window were joined by something else. Black SUVs. Unmarked. Screeching to a halt on the wet pavement, Kalen stiffened against me. The grief in his body instantly calcified back into tension. The alpha was back. He pulled away from me, turning toward the window, his body shielding mine. Elara, he said, his voice dropping back into that lethal, commanding register. Where is the back exit? Through the storage room, I stammered, wiping my face. Why, who is that? That, Kalen said, watching as heavy doors opened and men in tactical gear spilled out onto the street. Is the reason you should have trusted me. He looked back at me, his eyes glowing gold. Go get our son. The command wasn't shouted, but it carried more weight than the thunder rattling the window panes. Kalen's body was a rigid line of tension against the storm outside. The broken man who had been weeping into my hair seconds ago was gone. The Alpha Prime had returned. I pulled away from him, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I looked out the front window, past the display of new releases, to the street below. The red and blue lights of the local police cruiser had been swallowed by darkness. 3 massive, blacked-out SUVs had boxed it in. They sat idling in the rain like sharks in shallow water, their headlights cutting through the downpour. No markings, no plates. Are those your men? I asked, my voice trembling. No, Kalen said, his gaze fixed on the vehicles. My security team follows protocol. They announce their arrival. They don't block the exits. He turned to me, and the realization in his eyes was terrifying. Silas, he whispered. The name hit me like a slap. Silas, the beta. The voice I had heard in the office 5 years ago. He's been tracking me, Kalen said, the pieces clicking together in real time. He knew I was obsessed with finding you. He let me burn through resources, let me look crazy, waiting for the council to lose faith in me. He looked toward the back room where Leo was hiding. If I die without an heir, the alpha power transfers to the strongest beta, Kalen said, his voice dropping to a growl. Silas doesn't just want me out of the way. Elara, he wants the throne, and if he knows I have a son, if he knows there is a legitimate heir standing between him and the crown, he didn't have to finish the sentence. A chill that had nothing to do with the wet clothes soaked into my skin. Silas wasn't here to negotiate. He was here to clean up the loose ends he tried to cut 5 years ago. He's going to kill us. I breathed. He's going to try. Kalen corrected. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a sleek, black handgun I hadn't even noticed he was carrying. He checked the chamber with a practiced, lethal efficiency that reminded me, violently, that the man I loved was also a killer. Go. Get Leo. Keep him behind the counter. Do not let him see the door. I scrambled toward the office, my legs feeling like lead. I threw the door open. Leo was sitting on the floor, his headphones around his neck, clutching his sketchbook. He looked up, his violet eyes wide. He had felt the shift in the air pressure. He smelled the ozone and the fear. "Mom," he asked, his voice small. "Who are the bad men outside? We're leaving." "Baby," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "We have to go. Now." I grabbed his hand and pulled him into the main room. Kalen was moving furniture, with strength that didn't look human. He had shoved a heavy oak display table in front of the glass door, creating a barricade. When he saw us emerge, he stopped. The gun vanished into his waistband. The ruthless efficiency softened. Just for a second, he looked at Leo. Really looked at him. Leo didn't hide behind my legs this time. He stood there, in his dinosaur pajamas, holding his sketchbook like a shield, staring up at the giant of a man who smelled like rain and power. Kalen took a breath, steeling himself. And then he did something that made my chest ache. He dropped to his knees, the Alpha King, the man who made CEOs and senators tremble, lowered himself to the dirty wooden floor of a failing bookstore until he was eye level with a 5-year-old boy. He didn't reach out. He didn't try to hug him. He just stayed there, hands open and visible on his knees, showing he was safe, showing he was submitting. "Hi, Leo," Kalen said softly. His voice was rough, but he gentled it, stripping away the command. Leo blinked. "You're big." A corner of Kalen's mouth quirked up. "Yeah, I am. Are you going to fight the bad men?" "I am." Kalen nodded solemnly. "I'm going to make sure nothing hurts you. Or your mom. Not ever again." Leo studied him, his instincts processing the alpha pheromones filling the room. He took a tentative step forward. Kalen's eyes shone with unshed tears. But he held his position. He waited. He gave my son the one thing I had denied him for 5 years, a choice. "We need to move fast." "Leo," Kalen said, his gaze flicking to the window, where shadows were moving in the rain. "I need to get you to the car. Can I pick you up?" Leo hesitated, frowning a little. He looked at me, then back at Kalen. "Mom says I'm heavy," Leo said seriously. "I ate a lot of pizza." Kalen smiled then. It was a real smile, breaking through the scars and the exhaustion, transforming his face into something breathtakingly handsome. "I can hold the weight of the world." "Kid," Kalen whispered, extending his arms. "I can hold you." Leo stepped into his embrace. Kalen scooped him up as if he weighed nothing, tucking Leo's head against his shoulder, his large hand spanning nearly my son's entire back. I saw Kalen's eyes close for a fraction of a second, inhaling the scent of his child, grounding himself in the reality of what he was fighting for. When his eyes opened, the gold was brighter, hotter. "Stay behind me," Kalen ordered, standing up with Leo secure in his left arm, his right hand hovering near his waist. "Elara, grab my jacket. Put it over his head. Don't let him breathe the smoke." "The smoke?" I asked. Crash. The answer came in a shower of glass. A brick wrapped in dark tape sailed through the upper transom window, shattering the pane. It hit the floor with a heavy thud, followed instantly by a metallic hiss. Thick, gray smoke began to spew from the canister, filling the shop with the acrid, chemical stench of tear gas laced with wolfsbane. "Get down!" Kalen roared. He spun, twisting his body to shield Leo from the glass and the gas, shoving me toward the cover of the heavy oak counter. The front door rattled violently as a battering ram hit the lock. We weren't alone, and the time for talking was over. The monsters were at the door, but for the first time in 5 years, the monster inside the house was on our side, and he looked ready to eat the world alive. The front door didn't open. It exploded. The sound was deafening. A concussive boom that rattled the fillings in my teeth. Wood splintered into shrapnel, flying through the haze of gray smoke that was already filling the shop. Stinging my eyes and burning my throat, Kalen moved faster than human thought. He shoved me and Leo down behind the heavy oak counter just as the first wave of gunfire erupted. Bullets chewed through the bookshelves above our heads, sending confetti of paper and dust raining down on us. Pride and Prejudice and The Great Gatsby disintegrated into pulp. "Stay down," Kalen roared, his voice already distorting, deepening into something guttural. He reached under his jacket and pulled a second weapon, a jagged, silver-edged combat knife, and slammed it onto the floorboards next to my hand. "If they get past me," he snarled, his eyes bleeding from gold to a dark, violent crimson. "You don't hesitate. Alara. You aim for the throat. You kill them. Kalen, take Leo to the vault, go." He didn't wait for an answer. He vaulted over the counter, straight into the cloud of tear gas and smoke. I grabbed Leo, my fingers digging into his dinosaur pajamas, and scrambled on hands and knees toward the reinforced steel door of the back office, the room I jokingly called the vault because of its thick walls. Behind me, the sounds of the bookstore dying were horrific. I heard the wet, meaty sound of a fist hitting flesh, the snap of bone, and screams that were cut short by gurgling silence. Kalen was fighting men in tactical gear, but it sounded like a massacre. I shoved Leo into the office and slammed the deadbolt home. But as I turned, I saw the shadow fall over the transom window above the back alley exit. They weren't just coming through the front. They were flanking us, Mom, Leo whispered, huddled under my desk, his hands over his ears. "Stay there. Baby. Don't move." I grabbed the heavy, iron tape dispenser from the desk, a pathetic weapon against mercenaries. But it was all I had. I stood facing the alley door, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Out in the main shop, the noise changed. The gunfire stopped, replaced by a sound that made my blood freeze. It was the sound of fabric ripping, of joints popping and reforming, of a spine lengthening with a series of wet cracks. A roar shook the foundation of the building. It wasn't human. It was deep, resonant, and terrifyingly loud. The alpha had shifted. I peered through the crack in the office door. Through the swirling smoke, I saw him. A massive, midnight black wolf stood in the center of the ruin. He was enormous shoulder height, reaching a man's chest, his fur the color of a starless nightmare. He was a creature of pure shadow and violence. 3 rogues in shifted forms modeled gray and brown wolves, mangy and desperate, lunged at him. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Kalen caught the first one in midair, his jaws snapping around the rogue's spine with a sickening crunch. He tossed the body aside like a rag doll and swiped the second one into a bookshelf with a force that shattered the wood. He positioned himself at the mouth of the hallway leading to the office. He was the gatekeeper. The wall. A growl rolled out of his chest, vibrating through the floorboards under my feet. A warning that promised death to anything that tried to cross that threshold. But he couldn't see the back door. The glass of the alley entrance shattered inward. I spun around. A man in black tactical gear dropped into the room. He wasn't a wolf. He was human, armed with a silenced pistol. He saw me. And he saw Leo under the desk. He raised the gun. 5 years ago, Alara the archivist would have frozen. She would have begged. She would have waited for the alpha to save her. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was a mother who had spent 5 years looking over her shoulder. 5 years planning for this exact moment. A white-hot rage, purely maternal and violent, flooded my veins. It wasn't fear. It was instinct. I didn't scream. I lunged. I threw the iron tape dispenser with all my strength. It struck him square in the forehead with a heavy thud. He staggered back, the gun firing wild into the ceiling. I didn't stop. I launched myself at him, tackling him into the filing cabinets. We crashed to the floor. He was stronger, heavier, trained to kill. He struck me across the face. A blow that tasted like copper and stars. I clawed at his eyes, my nails digging in. Desperate, feral. I wasn't fighting for my life. I was fighting for the boy watching from under the desk. "Don't you touch him," I shrieked. Slamming my knee into his groin, he grunted, wheezing, and shoved me off. I hit the floor hard. The wind knocked out of me. He scrambled to his feet, blood pouring from his forehead, and leveled the gun at my chest. His finger tightened on the trigger. I squeezed my eyes shut. "I'm sorry. Leo. I'm so sorry." "Stop." The scream didn't sound like a child. It sounded like a shockwave. It hit the room with physical force, blasting the air from my lungs. It wasn't just volume, it was command. Pure, undiluted, ancient alpha authority. It carried the weight of a bloodline that had ruled for centuries. The mercenary froze. He didn't just hesitate, he went rigid, his muscles locking up against his will. The gun wavered in his hand. His eyes went wide, pupils blowing, as his biological instinct to submit to a superior predator overrode his conscious brain. Even I felt it, a heavy, blanket-like pressure compelling me to be still, to listen, to obey. I looked over. Leo had crawled out from under the desk. He was standing in the middle of the room, his small chest heaving, his fists clenched at his sides. His eyes were blazing not just violet, but glowing with an inner, ethereal light. For 3 seconds, the room was silent. The mercenary was paralyzed by the sheer impossible weight of a 5-year-old's command. 3 seconds was all we needed. A shadow eclipsed the doorway. The midnight wolf barreled into the room. Kalen didn't bark or growl. He was a silent blur of black fur and fury. He launched himself over me, his massive jaws closing around the mercenary's throat before the man could shake off the stun. There was a wet tear, a gurgle, and then the heavy thud of a body hitting the floor. Kalen stood over the fallen man, his chest heaving, his muzzle stained with justice. He looked at me, his crimson eyes frantic, checking for wounds. Then he looked at Leo. The glow faded from Leo's eyes. The adrenaline crashed. My brave little boy wobbled, looking at the giant wolf, and then at the dead man. "Daddy," Leo whispered, the word trembling in the air. The massive black wolf whined a high, broken sound. Kalen lowered his great head, nudging Leo gently with his nose, rubbing his cheek against Leo's small shoulder, smearing a tiny bit of blood on the dinosaur pajamas. It was a claim, a mark. "You are mine," the gesture said, "and nothing will ever touch you again." The silence that followed the violence was heavier than the gunfire. The smoke began to drift out the shattered windows, carried away by the coastal wind. In the center of the ruined bookstore, amidst the broken glass and the scattered pages of 1,000 destroyed stories, the midnight wolf was gone. In his place stood Kalen. He was back in human form, stripped to the waist, his skin painted in soot and blood that wasn't his. He was heaving for breath, the muscles of his back corded with tension. At his feet knelt Silas. The man who had tried to erase my family was on his knees, a broken thing. He looked up at Kalen, waiting for the killing blow, waiting for the snap of his neck that would end his treason. I stepped out of the office, shielding Leo's eyes against my hip. I watched Kalen raise his hand. Silas flinched, but the blow didn't come. "Death is too easy for you, Silas," Kalen rasped. His voice was a wreck, raw from the shift. "Death is a release. You don't deserve peace." Kalen leaned down, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried enough alpha command to shatter bone. "I strip you of your rank. I strip you of your name. I strip you of your pack." Silas let out a sound like a wounded animal, a wretched, high-pitched keening. To a wolf, this was a fate worse than execution. To be rogueless, to wander the wild spaces alone, hunted by everyone, belonging to no one. "Go," Kaylin said, pointing to the door. Run. Before I change my mind, Silas didn't look back. He scrambled over the broken glass and vanished into the rainy night. A ghost haunting a life he used to own. When he was gone, the adrenaline finally crashed. Kaylin turned slowly. The monster receded. And the man returned. He looked at me. And then at Leo, who was peeking out from behind my leg. The space between us seemed to vanish. The mate bond, which had been a frayed, agonizing tether for 5 years, suddenly snapped back into place. It wasn't a gentle tug, it was a collision. It was the feeling of a dislocated shoulder popping back into the socket, painful, overwhelming, and undeniably right. He crossed the room in 2 strides. Alara. He breathed. He didn't care about the blood. He didn't care about the audience of his security team now securing the perimeter. He pulled me into his arms, burying his face in the crook of my neck. Inhaling deeply, he shook against me. The invincible Alpha King was shaking. I have you, he whispered into my skin. I have you. I wrapped my arms around his bare shoulders, feeling the heat radiating off him. For the first time in 5 years, the cold knot of fear in my stomach unraveled. We're here, I whispered back. We're not running anymore. Leaving the bookstore felt like walking out of a tomb. The street outside was lined with a convoy of sleek, black SUVs. The flashing lights of the police had been replaced by the quiet, terrifying efficiency of the pack guard. Kaylin didn't let go of my hand. He carried Leo, who had finally succumbed to the adrenaline crash and fallen asleep against his father's chest. As we walked toward the lead car, I looked back at the shop one last time. The Pages was ruined. My sanctuary. My hiding place. But looking at it now, with its shattered windows and dark interior, I realized it hadn't been a home. It had been a cage. I climbed into the leather interior of the SUV, and as the door thudded shut, sealing out the noise of the rain, I watched the coastline disappear in the rearview mirror. We didn't go to a safe house. We went to the top of the world. The penthouse of the Thorn Tower sat 50 stories above the city, a fortress of glass and light. It was silent, pristine, and safe. We laid Leo down in the center of a bed that could have slept 4 people. He looked so small against the white sheets, his thumb tucked near his mouth, his breathing even and deep. Kaylin stood by the bed for a long time, just watching his chest rise and fall. He reached out, brushing a stray lock of dark hair off Leo's forehead with a touch so gentle it broke my heart all over again. He has your nose, Kaylin murmured. He has your stubbornness, I replied softly. He huffed a quiet laugh, then turned to me. He held out his hand. I took it. He led me out to the balcony. The rain had stopped, leaving the city below scrubbed clean and glittering like a field of electric diamonds. The wind up here was crisp, smelling of the ocean and possibility. I gripped the railing, looking out at the sprawling metropolis, the pack capital, the world I had fled. It's beautiful, I said, my voice barely audible over the wind. And terrifying. Kaylin moved behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, pulling me back against the solid wall of his chest. He rested his chin on my shoulder. What are you afraid of? He asked, going back. I admitted. Kaylin, I was an archivist. I was nobody. People looked right through me. Now, with everything that's happened, the politics, the council, the whispers, I turned in his arms to face him. I'm scared to go back to that world, I whispered. I don't know how to survive in a shark tank. Kaylin looked down at me. The gold in his eyes softened, warm and steady as a hearth fire. He reached up, cupping my face in his rough, warm hands, forcing me to look at him, to really see him. You aren't going back as an archivist, Alara, he said firmly. You aren't the girl who scanned files in the basement anymore. You are the woman who hid an heir for 5 years. You are the mother who took down an assassin with a tape dispenser. You are the mate who brought the Alpha to his knees. He brushed his thumb over my cheekbone. You are returning as the queen, he vowed. And this time I dare anyone to look at you wrong. He leaned down, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted of forever. Below us, the city lights shimmered. No longer a threat, but a kingdom waiting for its rulers. We had lost 5 years to silence and fear. We wouldn't waste a single second more. I was home, and that, my friends, is the story of the Alpha's lost dynasty. If your heart is racing, if you shed a tear for the years they lost, or if you just cheered when Leo used his Alpha voice, let me know in the comments below. What was your favorite moment? Was it the bookstore reunion? Or Kaylin's shadow wolf taking care of business? Don't forget to hit that like button, it helps the channel so much, and subscribe to Moonfire Tales for more romance that bites back. I'll see you in the next story. Stay wild.